Welcome to the X-Files, a special edition podcast from Full Prefrontal. We love stories because they take us to the secret hidden places where we store the essence of real living. Only through stories do we witness extraordinary moments of human resilience. In these special edition episodes, we hear the stories of former clients, learning about their gifts, challenges, aspirations, letdowns, and inner activism. The clients presented in the X-Files have helped Sucheta become a better listener, observer, problem solver, and above all, a caring clinician. She hopes these stories will melt your heart and help you see executive function in a new light. And now, here is our host, Sucheta Kamath.
I'm happy to bring another X-File episode, and today my guest is Wellington, for Kate for short. She's a young woman who is a college graduate pursuing a career in comedy, television, and film. She has been in the stand-up circuit for past few years, and she's funny. Yes, she's very funny. She's a talented comedian doing improv and sketch comedy, but all that has not been easy. Currently, to support herself, her day job is being a receptionist at a doggy daycare. I'm bringing this story to you because once you hear Kate talk about her struggles and this tricky balance between success and failures, you will be inspired. So welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you.
So let me ask you this first question. What were your challenges when you were young that created roadblocks in your success? What made you seek help?
Well, first of all, I remember meeting you when I was very young because my brother went to you also because all these issues really run in my family. Oh, very, very fast, very much. And I remembered that, and I brought it up to my mom that I wanted to see you. And the reason I did that was because I was in high school and I just wasn't getting what I wanted out of the experience, which who does? I had very, very interesting and very ambitious ideas for myself. When I was a freshman in high school, I really, truly believed that if I was just being my best self, I would be popular. And I wanted that. I just wanted to live out the potential I saw in myself because I was extremely confident. But I also had this dichotomy where I didn't have the kind of friendships that I thought I should have or felt like or that I wanted. And I didn't have those kinds of relationships that we're taught define the teenage years. And I was doing all right in grades, but it was very hard for me to do anything else. And also, I was just I wanted to fill up my time, and I couldn't. I couldn't do that because it was just...
What do you mean fill up your time?
I knew I was young, and I had so much more time than I would ever have again, so much free time. And I mean, just like packing my day, just doing things besides school and TV and internet. Yeah, I just wanted to be like working towards stuff and learning. I had a real thirst to learn things. I wanted to be good at so many things, and I wasn't good at anything particularly. And I wanted to be an interesting person, and I was, but because I was a weirdo, which is great. But like someone with lots of interesting experiences and stories to tell. Because I like telling stories, and the stories I had are about mundane things, and that's great too. But I just wanted to be this idea of cool that I had in my head, which is someone who's working towards things and is expressing their passion for an interest in that I had in the world. I wanted to be expressing the passion and interest I had in the world around me, and I was jumbled, and I was a 3.0 student, which I felt I could do better,
So what's interesting about what you say is I think it was very insightful of you to recognize that you had potential. And yes, when I met you, you were a combination of self-confidence and disorganization. Tell us a little bit about the struggle part of it. So there was one struggle that you mentioned, which is actually assimilating and connecting with your peers and being included in the larger group and being identified with as a group member. That was not happening. And then even internally, I think your ideas and your creativity was not channeled or coming to fruition because you didn't have the discipline, the habits, or the attention control that is needed to make see that through. Can you give us some examples? What were actual examples of those difficulties in your learning experience?
Well, with the learning, they were like, I would just always show up without the homework done. I would just constantly forget. And I was actually very conscientious. Like, I really cared about that kind of stuff. But I also couldn't remember to do the homework. And I remember in like younger grades, there would be like little sticker systems. And it was just, or like when I was in, especially young grades, when I was like in like first grade, every single class would be an I, which I think was just it was either like needs improvement or like incomplete or, something like that. So I really cared about these things and I just wasn't able to follow through. And I was very ambitious and I couldn't do it. And also there were like assignments that I was like genuinely interested in and I wanted to do a good job on. I remember there's this kind of a fun assignment where we actually got to be creative, like writing class, in like English class, where we were actually doing a creative writing exercise. And it was like make up a superhero and tell a story and all that stuff. And I didn't do that great on it. And I'm a really creative person, you know?
So where was the breakdown?
On that assignment or just in general?
That particular assignment?
I think the breakdown probably came on that one. I got like a C on it, which I don't like. And it really injured my pride and my creativity. And I think the breakdown was probably just somewhere simple, like in editing or really just thinking things through more and following through on the idea. Because I remember the idea. It was actually kind of stupid, but it was silly. It was silly. And I think that was the point it was like, I don't know if you remember. I'm like rolling my eyes at myself because I cannot bear my 15-year-old self. But so there's those commercials.
Tell us more.
Yeah, there are these commercials for the Cheer laundry detergent. And I thought it would be ridiculous or absurdist to do something where it was like literally her power is laundry. She fell into a vat of laundry detergent and now she has laundry powers.
I think that's so clever. Did you write about it?
I did write about it, but I'm sure it was very one note and didn't go anywhere because I probably didn't plan out the idea in advance the way that I would have when I developed more sophisticated skills. And then I also probably didn't edit it like at all.
You bring in a great example, Kate, about having an idea, for example, of writing about a superhero. I think to me, for that young person to think about a laundry powers can be a great superpower, honestly. It's the most mundane task, but probably hated the most. So imagine if somebody has superpowers, which means basically getting it done in a jiffy, who wouldn't like that? So I really like that. But sounds like developing an idea, expanding on it, conceptualizing it, and then actually putting it through this filter of editing, writing, presenting. And those are the skills which we call executive function. That was your real struggle. And when did you actually receive an official diagnosis of any kind? What was that like, the process of getting evaluated, tested, and then labeled? with a learning disability?
So I actually got diagnosed with learning disabilities when I was really, really young. So, and that was probably why I was able to do as well as getting B's and C's, or mostly B's though, like a three, close to a 3.0 anyway, because I was on ADHD medication. I was doing okay. I was fine. I'm bright and I'm on medication, but I got that diagnosis when I was really young because, I had older siblings who also were already diagnosed with it. And it was just so obvious, I think, probably. Someone in my family told me that when they took me to see the doctor, I guess maybe a psychiatrist, they were like, the doctor said, "This is the most ADHD child I've ever seen." And oh my God, I'm now I'm getting sidetracked, but my mom used to do these homeopathic remedies where she would put this like foul smelling liquid right on my forehead. And it was supposed to help me, and I was just like a weird smelling kid, you know? Because I mean, I took baths, but I also had this thing, and it made me the smelly kid. But getting the diagnosis wasn't something that particularly impacted me because I was so young. So just receiving the diagnosis itself didn't make a large difference in my life. It just ended up in me getting certain kinds of schooling and treatments and therapies and smelly liquid on my forehead. So
You were also diagnosed with some additional entities other than ADHD. Can you talk about that?
right. Yeah, I wasn't just diagnosed with ADHD. I also was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. And I think there's this other thing where I just have an overall body low muscle tone, just like my large motor skills and fine motor skills aren't good. And I think that's tied into dysgraphia, I guess. So I had like a childhood physical therapist kind of thing that was specialized in that. And it didn't work out that great because I still can't sit in chairs that well. I mean, it's not like people would be like, oh my God, she is struggling to sit in that chair. But basically, if you watch me sit down in a chair, I just flop down. Or driving, I'm really bad at driving. I'm so bad. My girlfriend says I just like have a loose grip on the steering wheel and I just don't know how to change it. I mean, I just have ADHD related social issues. And for a little bit, I thought I might have Asperger's, or I guess that doesn't exist anymore technically, beyond the spectrum. And it's not crazy for me to think that because I do know people who have what used to be called Asperger's and are probably have better social skills than I do. But I think it's I ultimately ended up realizing that it stemmed from my ADHD through you. I asked you, and you said I could see how you think that, but you don't. So that's what it was.
So, Kate, I really appreciate you painting a clear picture for everyone that I think having a diagnosis at a very young age did not really impact your self-knowledge as much as maybe it helped your parents to take decisions regarding schooling or maybe create some environment in the house. But not all decisions are taken well. And not all decisions lead to developing better skill set because it's such a complicated diagnosis and you needed a lot of help. I don't know if you remember this, but when I was working with your brother and you came along with your mom, you probably were in sixth grade at that time. And immediately, as a clinician, I could tell, and forgive me if I stated here, but mainly you had come just from school. Your uniform was completely stained with food. You still had food on your mouth, and your hair was so, just like wild. I'm sure it was combed at some point in the day, or in the morning. And also, I think, as you mentioned, where you were sitting, there was a whole sofa, and you were sitting in one tiny corner of that sofa. Typically, if there's nobody on on the sofa, you will sit in the middle of the sofa, or you'll have and it was just a picture for me that there's something unique about this person. And she probably could benefit from some work. The more interesting thing is once we met each other and I put my hand out to shake your hand, you turned away and you started talking about a plant that was in my waiting room. And so I don't know if you remember any of that. So, anyway, it's I think interesting that you talk about yourself from having gone through that journey. And I think your own awareness of your strengths, then when they met or butted heads with your difficulties, that's when I think it must have fueled the fire of wanting to bring change. So that brings me to this question. When did you first hear about executive dysfunction? And how did you take it? What did you think of it? Did you ever understand there was a label that explains a lot of your mismanagement?
So I think I actually first heard about executive dysfunction from you. I took it fine because I already knew I had issues and I pretty much just lumped it in with ADHD. I mean, I kind of understand now. I mean, it was probably on my list of disabilities that I just didn't know what it meant. I mean, I've kind of understand a lot of things about it. Yeah, I didn't really separate it from ADHD, and what I came to understand about it over time was that it was kind of a part and parcel of ADHD, and it's just more specifically referring to, I guess it would be like the secretary part of your brain, or maybe even the parental figure in your brain that tells you when you should and shouldn't be doing something, or helps you organize tasks and break them down and not just viewed as one confusing lump, which I did and still do sometimes, but I have more tools now to break them down. I guess what I realized is that if you have tools and you learn to make them habitual, then it makes it more manageable to control, but it's not going to go away. It's just going to be different.
I think that's a very good point. I think when we met or when we started our work, my experience of having dealt with executive dysfunction with people, what I realized pretty quickly that you were relating your symptoms to ADHD in a way that you thought you were not paying attention and you were disorganized. But I think the deeper parts of the thinking process that goes into having that parental supervision in the brain, or as you mentioned, the secretarial supervision of the brain, which is really evaluating goals or understanding the big picture or becoming flexible thinker or ignoring the trees for the forest, being more mindful of impact on others. Those skills were not in focus for you. And you were willing to kind of focus on, tell me how to improve my attention, but it was so linked to improving your ability to take good decisions for yourself that developing those skills does take time, doesn't it? So, can you give our listeners some examples of the struggles while you were in college that you ran into taking decisions or managing your goals or changing your own approach to life, not being able to do that well, and how that kind of compromised your success?
Well, okay, so when I was a freshman, it was a lot easier. And I was like, had all my habits on lock, and I was doing great. Except for even when I was a freshman, I was not reining myself in, and I just didn't realize it. The thing is, I was a part of like 17 clubs, like in a very literal sense. It was probably between 7 and 17 clubs. I was actually a part of it. I was trying to figure stuff out, but I mean, that's too much. Just pick one thing. Pick two things, maybe, you know? And then it was just also very hard for me to maybe let go of some things, some ideas that I had, which sometimes worked in my favor from a persistence standpoint. But, like, you know, I probably could have done better if I could have just maybe picked the web series that I was working on instead of always trying to create this TEDx that people said they were interested in but weren't really following through with. If I had picked the thing that people were really seeming committed to that I could have done better. And I was so frustrated by not understanding why people were saying that they want, oh, that's such a good idea. I want to do that. That sounds good, but then not showing up to meetings. Or I would try to get people to help me shoot things, so I could have like a crew of people, and they just weren't showing up, and I didn't understand. And honestly, I still don't understand. It's stupid, but I kind of know now when to see those signs and how to pick and choose some things better than others. I can kind of look at a project and be like, okay, this isn't going to go well. Like, I see signs. I'm like, okay, the person who's running this is like an idea that they think is cool but haven't thought through and aren't super committed to it as much as maybe the other people involved are. So this is going to disband. I feel it. So I will pick whatever will be the most beneficial for me part. Like, for instance, recently, I'm saying this because this is a thing that I wouldn't have been able to do in college. There's this thing where, they met on a day that wasn't good for me already. So that helped because I knew I had other goals that were more relevant what that would happen on that day. And before I even got involved in those groups, I said, I'm going to reserve this day. I'm not going to even go to these meetings before that time.
So, Kate, once it became clear to you that you are struggling with executive dysfunction and it needs very specific intervention and developing routines and learn the strategies that go with it, we began our work. Can you explain from your point of view, how is this therapy different from counseling or tutoring?
Okay, so it's actually kind of in between there because if I were in a tutoring situation, I would never talk about my interpersonal issues. I would never talk about the things that I'm emotionally struggling with. And if I was with a counselor, they could kind of help me. Their job isn't to help me make decisions. Their job is to just hear me and maybe give me some new points of view. And that's something that you do well, is that you hear me, but you give it for all aspects of life. You're able to provide. I'm able to outsource. I'm actually probably like stealing this from you, but you're like, you can be my executive brain for me and tell me how to do the things that maybe in a different brain should come naturally. And also give me that extra perspective on what it is to reflect back at me. But in addition, you also give me no, neither of those two would give me homework to help train me for the future, where that you help me to develop those habits that are going to be instilled in me long term, where it becomes automatic that I think of certain things. And it's actually sometimes, like, for instance, it's become an automatic thing in me for even when my girlfriend says, I have this idea for a project, that I automatically start breaking down what we would need to make that happen. And it irritates her and it stresses her out. And it's probably a little bit too much sometimes, but if I'm doing that now, it means that I can actually plan the time for what I need and think things through in a way that I never did when I was going to 7+ clubs, or before then either. I would just have these inventions and tons of ideas. I want to do this and that and this and that and this and that. But now I know, all right, more about how much time things take. I had no concept of that before. I know more about it now. And I know how much effort things are going to take and what things I'm going to need. And is there a way I can simplify this and get the same thing out of it, or get more out of it by doing less? I can think about those kinds of decision-making things. And before, I had no sense of priorities.
Perfect sense. I like the way you summarized the distinction I myself had not thought about, that giving homework assignment can be such a distinct part of this kind of training and a lot of the principles that I use with you, they're founded in something called cognitive rehabilitation. So they're based on how to rehabilitate the brain that has experienced some type of impairment or a roadblock. And one of the focus that I really appreciate you mentioning was reflection. Reflecting on self from a perspective of the other is an important part of executive process. And people who struggle with executive function are not really good at it because they don't. It's like imagine having a mirror that's foggy. So the reflection you see in the mirror is not really distinct and clear. So part of this process of training is to clear that mirror, use Windex for the mirror, so to speak. You have some thoughts about that?
Yeah, and that's true. Before, one of the things that I would do is that when I was younger and didn't have as much training, I would say things that would be problematic for me, and I would say them and I wouldn't think about them anymore. I wouldn't. They would be said and gone to me. It wouldn't occur to me how this might impact if you have consequences and all this sort of thing, or just really affect people in ways that I might not see. And like there might be a fight and I would brush it off, or I would just get really upset and I just wouldn't understand. And now I kind of have tools to kind of break down, like, okay, for example, me and my friend or me and my girlfriend, we disagreed about something. She said these things. I hurt her feelings. Let me think about that. Let me try and think about it from her perspective, what she might have been hearing, maybe what she might have been thinking, and just say it back to her and kind of add on to it. And at this place where now I can, all right, so I got a reaction out of this that I saw. I saw and paid attention to the other person's response. And then I said, okay, I'm not happy with this. They're upset. Let me think about what this means. And I have a way of breaking this down and thinking about it where now I can do this thing where, okay, we had some time and it takes me like 20 minutes to think about it or an hour to think about it and get that to that place where I see their perspective and I'm actually quite sensitive to it and I'm able to talk about it in a nuanced and very actually impressively emotionally intelligent way. It just takes me longer to get there.
Very beautifully explained. And thank you for sharing that. I like to think that people with executive dysfunction have a remote control without a pause button. And therapy is instilling that pause button. And during that pause, a lot of reflection can occur, a lot of generating ideas can occur. But these ideas are particularly a person like you who's very creative. You don't have a shortage of ideas, but it is ideas for self. How do I change me? How do I redirect me? So these ideas are directed towards self. So now that you're pursuing a career in comedy, which is to me is like a very difficult field, by the way, and I'm so impressed with your funny bone and the way you deliver is just amazing. I can't wait to see you on tonight's show. Let's talk a little bit about how we have done some work in helping you build that career. Even though I'm not a comedian, I'm just a consumer of comedy. But there's a lot of executive process that goes into it, and you struggle with some of those parts, but we have worked on very specific aspects of it. Do you mind sharing?
Sure. Okay, so in comedy, there is a very intricate kind of network. It's very social based, especially stand up, because it's the comedians at first. They're comedians and they're bookers, and at first, the comedians are the bookers. So these are like a combination of like your coworkers and your boss and your friends, and it's a very complicated social landscape in an area that the people who do the best are get the most are people who are very socially savvy. So that's one thing you help me with is kind of navigating that, and that's one thing I hope to get better at. And another thing is you also force me to consider the ways that I need to edit more, right, to refine my product in all of the different areas. help me consider the ways that I need to edit myself to refine my product in all of the different areas in sketch and in stand-up. And that's not something that is as natural to me or fun for me. I mean, it is fun because I'm learning it, but it's hard, so it's not fun at first. And the better I get, the more I can enjoy that secondary form of creativity in it. But I'm an ideas person, and I think a lot of ADHD and executive function people are ideas people. So editing, I don't necessarily want to do it naturally. So you help kind of force myself to do it.
And Kate, one more thing that I think we have focused on, which was again new to me that you needed this help, is the timing and delivery. I think you are so creative that you, as in your field, they call it a set. You play or toy with the set quite a bit. And based on my own experience of watching comics for years, I know people repeat that set again and again and again to perfection. And for you to get to that point requires a lot of routine building, self-disciplining, and also impulse control. And you used to resist that, but I see a big change in that.
Yeah, it's true. It does, especially the impulse control thing where sometimes I am just I get into a space and I want to do well and I just also want to throw everything out at the same time and just everything sucks. Let me just do nothing. Or just I feel like I feel this kind of impatience, this impulsivity to just constantly keep moving and having a brand new set when I probably haven't developed it to the point where it should be. And to develop it a lot of times just requires a lot of repeating it in just a lot of different situations. And sometimes it feels like you're not making progress, and that is really hard for me to feel like I'm not making progress or not changing things or I'm not in motion. And that's probably a thing a lot of people with ADHD struggle with, is people with brains that are constantly in motion. Of course we want everything also to be constantly moving, but that's not ultimately how you get to be a polished and skilled performer or writer. And I mean, sure, and I think now I've kind of I'm working on that, but I think now I've kind of learned to like harness that aspect of myself, the good that it brings me, in that I try to ground myself in the room so I'm not being rote. I try to not make it as stiff and not have a set list where I just know my jokes well enough that I don't say in between them, but I just kind of let the flow come to me, that I'm thinking out loud, which I think is fun for people. That's that effortlessness that people really enjoy seeing in a comedian, that makes them think, oh, this is easy for them. This is natural for them.
I myself have seen such a growth in you with respect to your comedy that there's a comic confidence, if I can say, that's very visible now. And I think one of the challenges that I have seen having in this field for 20 years, that folks with ADHD tend to get very bored with anything that is a routine, and they feel anything that they need to be performing, I guess, or doing, it is stifling them. And you kind of are in a very unique predicament as a comic. You need to have a set that's predictable, routinized, and on an autopilot. And then you yourself are resisting that. But I think you found a good balance there. So as we come to an end, Kate, what would your message be for all those who are just like you know, highly talented, highly motivated, have high standard for themselves, have great expectations for success, don't take a learning and curiosity lightly, but genuinely struggle in finding a path that connects the dots for them? And you're not alone, and your story is going to bring a lot of meaning. But can you share some message of hope for them?
Okay, so my advice to people going through a similar thing is that you don't have to feel it as necessarily a bad thing. It's a different thing, right? And you just have to take the good with the struggle, the excel and the excellence with the challenges, and try to use the things you're good at to as best as you can, and just don't be afraid to, if you feel like I just need to set up this thing and maybe it will be silly to someone else. Like if you feel you need to set up a study hall type situation in order to work on this project, just do it. Just do it. Don't worry about what other people need or what's normal. And the last thing is to focus on your creativity and find your way through that into the things you're struggling with and to form those habits. Because, I guess what I would consider, my strength, and I imagine applies to someone else out there listening, is that, we have the primary creativity, that initial spark. And in, the executive function skills tend to apply more to the secondary, providing structure kind of thing, and just try and get creative about how you can find the structure. And it'll take a lot of focus to narrow things down into its like most minimal form, and that's what structure requires. That's what editing requires. But you can also get creative in like how you get help. Apply that creativity to how you can restrain yourself.
I think that's terrific. Really incredibly valuable advice. Thank you for being on this show, Kate. Your wisdom, your observations, and your candor, particularly to be so open about your struggles, is invaluable. I really thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Full Prefrontal, Exposing the Mysteries of Executive Functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full Prefrontal.